Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, friends, readers, listeners, and viewers from wherever you may be tuning in, whichever part of the world. I do appreciate your fellowship and for taking time out of your day to join us, and especially those that are signed in to where you can communicate with others that are in the chat room, and as we share, the inquiries, the questions, and some of the strange answers that many of us have been blessed to come to discernment on, as far as the strange nature of the matrix and the strange nature of the realities, which are every day more and more truth is coming to light, which just seems completely fantastical and beyond belief. And so for many that are waking up, and there are a lot, we are all being asked to question again what it is that we've been taught as reality, and the things that we believe that we know as being concrete, and that we know as a certainty, because it seems like now we just don't know who to trust anymore and what to really even believe in. You know, there's so much even on TV that is questioning people's accepted belief systems, the foundations that they have laid to build up all of the other aspects of what they consider to be reality. And so the strange nature of the fallen angels and their presence upon this planet, the interdiction into the affairs of humanity, and how it was that they sired onto the world stage a group of giants known as the Men of Renown, and the strange nature of all of the megalithic structures that we find worldwide. And many now are still daily, people are locating and finding underwater structures connected to cities that were built at a time when, you know, science claims that we were hunterers and gatherers, and that we had no technology or capability to build the kind of cities and megalithic structures that are, you know, in the archaeological record and found within the geology of the world. And there are many structures being found in jungles across the planet, in places that are largely uninhabited, that have not been explored. And there are still many such places across the spectrum of the planet. And the more that these regions and areas become populated, the more evidence comes to light on the crazy nature of what the ancients had spoken about in their mythologies and in their oral traditions, what science and modern day, what we would call civilized people, have ascribed to being mere mythology and fantasy. And so revisiting the old mythologies and the old stories, and especially for those that have been brought to discernment on a lot of these things, we are seeing connections where we never had previously. And so a lot of things are being revealed, and it's my opinion that these things are being revealed to us now because we are the last generation, and that all of the secrets that have been hidden are going to come to light, so that all of us can have the knowledge and the discernment that it will take to finally make a choice on whether it is that we want to serve the Father and the Son and the Most High, or Satan and the sinister forces that are temporarily reigning over the illusions of this world, the carnal and material, the visible worlds that we find ourselves embodied in. And those of you that have read my work and have looked into especially my latest book, Sons of God, Who We Are and Why We're Here, and I'm working on this new book, which I don't yet have title for, but it will expand even further on how it was that we had previous embodiment, and that we were spiritual beings that had taken part in life and being, which is connected to a whole other era and epoch of history that is not connected to our flesh embodiment. And many are, and I receive emails from people, all over the world that speak about their own remembrance and how it is that they have been led to similar discernment, and that when they find my work, it resonates with them to such a degree that it helps them to piece together the puzzle of truth that have been largely disconnected and not ascertained in the way that I have brought it forth to the community, to those of you that are truth seekers and that do your own homework and that have been brought to the same kind of conclusions. And there's many of us, and I don't claim to be any great authority on truth, but I have been blessed to come to know some things that are still considered lunatic fringe by the mainstream churches, by the pastors and preachers and ministers that don't have answer to the esoteric nature of what is revealed within the gospel, especially when it pertains to the seed of Cain and the feathered serpent, the fallen angels, or to the giants, and how it was that all of this has been elaborated upon and hidden, veiled within the Word, because so many have read the Bible over and over many, many times, but yet these particular issues, these particular topics have remained hidden to them because they have not had the insight to bring forth the truth that is and has always been there, written in plain sight. And so many that, and even for myself, when I was led to a lot of discernment on these particular things, that when I went back and read the Word, the Old and New Testament, and the extra biblical books, the pseudepigrapha, the apocryphal books, with even the new releases on some of the new collections, the Nag Hammadi Codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that I was finding, even with like the release of the Colburn Bible, which came out in 2006, I was finding parallels throughout all of the texts, which once somebody has discernment on these things, it helps to bring to light the fullness of the story in its scope and in its amazing revelation. And so I thank all of you that have shared with me your testimonies, that have sent me your questions and your answers, and that have, really forced me to know what it is that I'm talking about, and also to look at things in a different light, and to question certain aspects of the truth that we've been sharing for so many years now, which I may never have, thought about or interpreted in such ways. And so I'm very grateful to all of you for the interaction and for the dialogue and for helping me to also come to discernment on so many things that I otherwise would not have. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to tie together some interesting stories, and know that I am looking into the chat room, and I will be seeking out your questions where I can. But I wanted to make, and just let the listening audience know that I just recently did a written interview with a young lady named Dina Ray, which it has been made public. It just came out today, and I did post a link on my Facebook page. And also this Monday, I will be a guest on the Twilight Paranormal show, which you can find the link, and I don't have the link to the direct show myself yet, but twilightparanormal.org for those that are interested in listening in on that show. It will be broadcast live 9 p.m. Eastern Monday evening. And so I wanted to start with the Word, and to always, I always build my foundation up on what I find written within the Gospel, because it's my opinion that, if you can't, because all the secrets are there, and for those that have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the mind to understand, you will find also that, in truth, all the secrets are contained within the Word. But I wanted to start with a few quotes where Christ in the New Testament speaks about and calls the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those that are the church authority of his day and age. He references them as being a generation of vipers. And, there's always symbolism and specific symbolism associated to what Christ reveals, and that the things that he says are deeply profound, and that they contain cryptic messages which, a lot of times could not be understood by those of his day and age. And even in the book of Enoch, when Enoch is revealing his testimony on the fallen angels and the giants, he writes how the things that he was going to be communicating within the text, how it would be for a generation that is far into the future. And so just to read 4 real quick references. In Matthew chapter 3, verse 7, it says, "But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees come to his baptism, he said unto them, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" In Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, he says, "O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." In Matthew chapter 23, verse 33, he says, "Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell?" In Luke chapter 3, which is a reflection, of course, of Matthew chapter 3, the 4 Gospels parallel each other, even though they are detailed in different ways, so that more and more information is brought to light in reading all 4 of the books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He says, Then said he to the multitude that came forth to be baptized of him, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? And so he's associating these generation of vipers with the wrath and the judgment that will come when he returns again to separate the harvest, the wheat and the tares, the goats and the sheep, the left from the right-hand path, the wise from the foolish virgins. And so, referencing another passage which he speaks about in detail when he's citing who it is that these generation of vipers, why it is that they are called vipers, and how it is that they are connected to the Nachash in Genesis chapter 3. And many of you are aware of the story in Genesis chapter 3, where it speaks about the serpent. If you're not, I'll read real quick. Genesis chapter 3, it says, "And now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God hath made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons." And of course, the next part, which I won't go into, is when the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, came into the garden and asked them why they were hiding. And then Eve told God that the serpent had beguiled her, and Adam said that the woman had eaten and gave to him also, and then God speaks to the serpent after they basically are passing the blame. He tells them that in the prophecies of Genesis chapter 3 that Eve would bring forth children in sorrow, and that Adam would be required to work the soil to bring forth sustenance to feed his children, whom he was now going to have children, whereas before, when he was in paradise, he was also of an angelic, bright-natured, immortal. He was an immortal being, much like the angels of heaven. And so he did not have the body nor the capacity to bring forth children. It wasn't until the beguilement and their fall into flesh and the transformation of their bodies that these prophecies would be fulfilled, in Eve giving childbirth. And the serpent, the Lord says to the serpent that there would be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And so we're gonna clarify this particular reference and these particular prophecies. In Matthew chapter 13, Christ is speaking to the multitude, but after he sends away the multitudes, he says to his apostles and his disciples that he's going to reveal to them the strange nature of the parable of the wheat and the tares. And in verse 35, he says, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. And so what he is about to reveal is a huge secret, one that most of the generations of humanity that have come up and have incarnated into flesh form, that this is something that they did not understand in clarity, something which, once understood, would make known not only the parable of the wheat and the tares, but also other secrets that are tied to and connected to this particular revelation. And for those that are very well versed and know about what is written in Matthew chapter 13, you've heard me read this many, many times. But for those, and there's a lot of new listeners, and for those of you, especially since I've been doing shows with the hijacker, because largely those that follow his show and that listen to the many shows on freedomslips.com, they are more New Age oriented, and many of them have not ever read the Bible, have never looked into the strange nature of what is contained and revealed and veiled within the gospel. And so many of them have not heard about these particular things, and so I will read to give them a reference. And it's also good for those of you that are familiar with these passages to hear them again in association to the things that I will be speaking about and connecting here today. So, in verse 36, then Jesus sent the multitude away. So he's sending away the masses, those that he usually speaks in parable form to, because they have no discernment, and basically he's just planting seeds. So that at some point, if the Holy Spirit comes upon them and they are in their seeking led to discernment on these issues, they will understand the things that he spoke previously. And it's the same thing for us, for those that have read over these particular passages and others, in the gospel and the word, but did not have the understanding to unlock what was contained within the metaphors and the verbs and the nouns and the words that are cryptically revealing these particular things. So he sends the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So they want to know specifically what the parable of the wheat and the tares is speaking about, what it's referencing. Why is it such an important parable for them to understand and to come to know? And he answered and he said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And so with this one parable, Christ is basically unlocking the reference of Genesis chapter 3:15, where it says, where God is speaking to the serpent, and he says that I will put enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Unless you have discernment, you just cannot understand what it is referencing. And so here he says that the field is the world, and that the good seed are his children, but that the tares, which are mockeries and that are mimicking the good seed, they are the children of the wicked one. And he says the enemy sowed them. The enemy is the devil, where it says in Revelation chapter 12, it says that the devil is the dragon, that old serpent that deceiveth the whole world. And he's also referencing how when he comes again at his second coming, when he descends and with a shout and the trumpet, the sound of a trumpet, that his angels would be sent as reapers to gather together the tares to be burned and the wheat to be put into the barn. And so that's why it is that this particular parable is so very important for you to understand, because without the revelation of what it is revealing, you would not understand that the devil has his own children on this planet, and that there are truthfully those that are in physical embodiments that are the children of the devil. And that these particular children, as being connected to the Nachash, have a strange reptilian nature, which we're going to be speaking more about. But I want to reference one more passage that is also part of Matthew chapter 13, and it's just a little bit previous. It begins with verse 24. It says this, because this is going to tie together with the serpent of Genesis chapter 3 that told Eve that she could eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that her eyes would be open, she would be as God herself. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. And so the servant of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. And so here again you have reference to the devil as being the enemy that snuck into the garden, into paradise, and sowed his own seed into the field that was the world. And it's my conclusion, in my opinion, from having researched this thoroughly, that what Christ is referencing here is the beguilement of Eve in Genesis chapter 3. And her having become pregnant with Cain, who is cited many times and in many places as being of the wicked one. And that he was the first hybrid child in line of the tares, of the goats. And that's why it is, again, in my opinion, that Cain and his bloodline, his lineage, that they are left out of the lineage of Adam and of the line which Christ, as Savior Messiah, would be born from. And we'll go into that in more detail as well. But before we do so, I want to read, and then I'll check the chat room. I want to read from a passage which many of you are very familiar with. It's one of two passages which are referenced as being connected to Satan, to Lucifer, and that reveal details of his station prior to his rebellion and the insurrection that occurred in heaven, where 1/3 of the angels joined him in his rebellion against the Most High, and 4 such actions were cast out and banished from the upper heavens. And for those, again, that are familiar with the word, Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14 are the ones that are connected to this particular, to Satan in this particular revelation. I'm not going to read all of this, but for those that are new, there's a part of Isaiah 24 which I want to focus on, which again gives confirmation as to what Christ is speaking about in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 25, where it's speaking about the enemy that had snuck into paradise to sow the tares, and how it is that this line, Cain's line and the seed of the serpent, how they are children of the devil. And so I'm going to just start from verse 14. Actually, I'll start from verse 12 to bring this story to light. It says, and this is from Isaiah chapter 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord. I will also make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. All right, what I want to focus on in this particular passage, because many know that it's connected to and gives reference to Satan, especially with all those previous passages where it says, I will, I will, I will, I will. You see the vanity of Lucifer as he's making all these declarations that he's going to be like the Most High. He's going to set his throne higher than the stars of God, on and on and on. But the focus that most people miss when they read this particular passage, and that gives confirmation of the premise of my fourth book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, in which I bring clarity to all of what I'm speaking about here, and in greater ways than I can cover in, a 90-minute show. And even though I've spoken about this on many, many different shows, that book contains all the connections that I've found in all the many different places, from a lot of the extra biblical sources that are also connected to this particular revelation. And I quote and cite all of those particular passages in that text so that you can read them for yourself and that you can pinpoint them in the different places they are found through the wide scope and the full spectrum of all of the gospel and all of the scriptures that are connected to this particular revelation. And so you can go there and read the particular passages that I've taken out and quoted that are connected to this, but then you can also read the passages before and after so that you can get the full context of what those passages are revealing and how it is that those things are tied to and connected to what Christ was speaking about in Matthew chapter 13 and other places. Even those four quick references that I spoke about with the Pharisees and Sadducees as being called the den of vipers. Why the snake symbolism? Why the connection, and how it connects to the Nachash of Genesis chapter 3, which is not a serpent, so to speak, not a snake, or a snake that wanders around on its belly, that has no arms and legs. That, remember, in reading Genesis chapter 3, it was after the beguilement of Adam and Eve, after they ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and after the prophecies were revealed, the ones in Genesis chapter 3, that the serpent was put on his belly, that his arms and legs were shriveled up. And so this particular serpent, prior to that happening, it had capacity to not only speak to Adam and Eve in their own language and in their own tongue, and had the ability to communicate and to understand what it is that they were saying, but he was wise to such a degree that he could deceive them into disobeying their God and into doing the one thing that was commanded of them to not to do. All right. So the particular passage which most people gloss over and overlook in this particular passage, Isaiah chapter 14, is verse 19. Verse 19, 20, and 21, where it says, "But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch." In the Word, throughout the Gospel, you have references to trees as being like men, and to children as being like fruit. You will see that, and you can do a detailed search on your own to get confirmation of what I'm talking about. But for those that do look into all of this, you will see the connection. Laura says that this is way over her head. I'm hoping that I can explain this in such a way that you'll be able to get it. And especially for a lot of the new listeners that cannot see all the connections, that hopefully when I bring all of this together for you, that you will understand it in more detail. And so, Laura, just stick with me, sister. You're gonna get all this as well, because it was the same for many of the listeners that first began to listen to me and that did not understand these concepts. After a while, you'll get it. So just trust that the Lord will reveal these things to you, and that discernment will come upon you, and you will have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the mind to understand. And that once you reach that space, sister, it will be a great blessing upon your life. Because then when you go back to reading the Word, you will understand so much of what has been hidden. And the other individuals that have, also have understanding on this, they can attest to what I'm talking about. All right, so looking again back at verse 20, 21, and 22, Isaiah chapter 14. It says that Satan, or Lucifer, as referenced in this passage, "Thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch," because he is the tree that sowed the seed of the wicked ones, the children of the devil, the tares. Continue. "And as the raiment of those that are slain thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit as a carcass trodden under feet." See, Satan, at the end of days, he is going to be required to take on the semblance of a man. Remember where it speaks about how Apollyon, Abaddon, he that once was, he will, as the Antichrist, he will come to possess the form of a man, and it will be in this form that he will die the death of a man. And this is referenced in Psalm 82, where it speaks about the princes of the first world age and how it was that they would be required to take on flesh form and to assume and incarnate into the flesh during the second world age. When Satan beguiled Eve and caused the fall of humanity, he also would be required to die the death of man. Just like all of us are now, those of us that are in flesh embodiment, we are all required to die the death of a man, to go through the cycle of being born, of changing and growing up, and at some point we would eventually die, which is the same thing that God told Adam and Eve before they ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that if they ate of it, that they would be required to die, which they did. Once they were transformed into flesh, they would have to succumb to death. And that's what Lord God was speaking about. So, verse 21, prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. So in this particular passage, Yahweh Elohim is speaking about the seed of the serpent, the seed of the wicked one, the line of Cain, and how he was going to eradicate them at every step of the way, that he was going to war against the line of Cain, because Satan had promised to them and still promises to them that they will inherit and will rule over this material world, that they will rule over the carnal, visible world that we find ourselves incarnated into. And this is the promises that he makes to the Illuminati. The same thing that he promised the angels that joined him in rebellion during the first world age, that joined him in, fighting on his side in the war in heaven. He promised them glory. He promised them kingdoms to rule of their own. He promised them self-determination to where they would not even have to worry about the judgment or the consequences of a Most High God, and that they wouldn't have to follow the Ten Commandments as laid out as directives for controlling or guiding the behaviors of the angels and humanity in loving our God, and also in treating each other in benevolence and treating others as we would want ourselves to be treated. And if we as a world, as a collective, had just followed those directives, we would never have created the mess that we find ourselves in now. That we would never have had to experience the evil that we see so prevalent all around us. It's because we want free will to do as we wish. The motto of the Satanists, the Luciferians, do as thou wilt. It's that particular recklessness and commitment towards self-glory and selfishness over, what is good for the collective and what is good for everyone, that creates the karma, the evil, the anger, the animosity, the jealousness, the envy, that drives others to commit sin against their neighbors, against their fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters, against their God. And so Satan utilizes these same promises, and why wouldn't he? They worked so well in causing even the angels of the Most High to rebel against their Creator. He uses these same promises to get those that are seeking power, seeking authority, seeking wealth, seeking to be famous, seeking to rule over others, to align with his intent and to give allegiance to him as being their God. And there are many. In fact, there are more that are deceived that are of this class than there are of the elect and those that will be counted worthy among the righteous to inherit salvation and to be brought back to return to our first estate, to our original place of inhabitation. And so that's the travesty. That's the tragedy of a dying race of people, of humanity, is that so many have been deceived in such a way that they are so willing to give themselves to give up their eternal inheritance for the temporary rewards of this world. And it's because most don't believe in a eternity or in a judgment or in a harvest to come. Because why else would they give up immortality for anything of a temporary, for a short time? That they have to not believe in God in order to, in my opinion, to just so willingly give up possibility of eternal life. And that's the sad nature of where we find ourselves in this fallen world, in a fallen state of, in this fallen state of being, is that so many don't believe in God and don't know their Creator and have no connecting link to them, that they don't know who they are. They don't know thyself as Christ has commanded us all to do. To know thyself, because it's in knowing thyself that we understand and realize that we are not just our flesh bodies, that we are the spirits that inhabit our flesh bodies, and that our spirits have connection to the Father and the Son, to the Creator, and that it is that connection to them that is the consciousness, the light, and the glimmer of our eyes, the warmth of our bodies. It's that aspect of ourselves that gives us chance to live and be through what is the armor of our soul, the flesh body. But without that inhabiting the flesh dies. And so last passage connected to this, verse 22. For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord. So here, Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, is saying that he is going to cut off these people and their expectation to rule over what essentially is the New World Order. Because that is also the promises that Satan has made to the Illuminati and to the secret societies that give themselves over to the agenda of world government, even when they know that it has sinister repercussions for the world. Their plan is to depopulate the planet to such a degree that they can have a servant class and that they can easily rule over those that are remaining. And so that means death and destruction. And they're totally okay with poisoning the food, poisoning the water, with injecting people with vaccines that could contain the mercury. They're totally okay with poisoning the air through the chemtrails, even when it affects their own children. They're okay with creating a world of chaos in order for them to dominate, hold authority, and control power, which gives them the ability to rule in impunity. Let me check the chat room. All right. It's nice to see such meaningful dialogue taking place in the chat room. And for those of you that are very familiar with this work, thank you for helping those that are, just coming to this discernment. I really appreciate all of you. Michael is asking who the reptilians are. Well, the reptilians are basically connected to the Nachash of Genesis chapter 3. And so we're going to go into that. Georgia asks, what do you think the mark of Cain was? And all I can tell you is what I have read from the different books. And in seeking out what the mark of Cain was, it speaks about in the, I believe it's the Zohar or the Talmudic text, some of those that are the commentaries on, that are written by the rabbis of old as commentary on the Torah. Now, again, I'm not saying this is scriptural or that this is through divine revelation. I'm just going to tell you what it says. But to give you understanding on this, I'm just going to relay a story. And this is the story of Lamech, who was the grandfather of Tubal-Cain. Lamech and Tubal-Cain, who is referenced in chapter 4 as being of the line of Cain, he was cited as being the one that brought forth, he was an artificer. He was a weaponsmith, and that he knew how to work metals out of the ground and then to forge weapons to bring, to extract metals from the different rocks. And of course, he was taught this by the angels, because the book of Enoch also cites how it was that the angels brought down different knowledge, the secrets of heaven, and taught them to humanity in order to deceive them and to lead them astray, and to also cause murder, chaos, and havoc upon this particular planet. And so Tubal-Cain was one of those that was shown how to extract metals and to create weapons of war. But anyways, when he was a young child, he was out hunting with Lamech, who was blind at this time. And, Lamech was the first polygamist as well. He had 2 wives. But he was hunting with his grandson, and his grandson told him he had to point him in the direction of whatever it was that they were trying to hunt. And Tubal-Cain pointed him to this particular direction, and he shot an arrow and killed a beast. And then walking up to the beast and feeling the beast, he realized that whom he had killed was their patriarch, the patriarch of the line of Cain, and that he had in fact killed Cain himself. And that in the story he speaks about how they knew that it was Cain because Cain had a horn on his head. And so in the Talmudic text, or these particular commentaries, it cites that Cain was given a horn in order to protect himself from the other creatures of the planet, and that was also what had set him apart from the other humans of that day and age. Now, whether this is true or not, I'm making no claim one way or the other. I'm just telling you what it says in the text. And that's the only text really where I find any elaboration upon what the mark of Cain might be. Now, certainly, the mark of Cain could be both spiritual and physical, and what form and shape and embodiment that assumes, we all have yet to know. But we will be taught all of the secrets, and we'll be able to ask all these questions of our King and of our Lord, and He will give us the answers in detail. Just have to prepare yourself to be counted among the elect. Like the wise version, be ready for the return. Be perpetually ready for the return of Christ, so that you can ask Him directly all of these things for yourself. All right, now as far as the reptilians, as cited in Genesis chapter 3, they are connected to the Nachash. The Nachash is a diviner and enchanter. He was not a snake that went around on his belly. It speaks about in the ancient traditions and the mythologies of the world that the Nachash was a feathered serpent, and that many of the cultures and civilizations found across the world that in the early days of these pre-Adamic humans, that these Nachash, or the feathered serpent, had come to them and taught them about the higher things of society and life, and had it helped them to establish organization and to come together in a way that they began to work the land and to understand how to domesticate, different animals, and they also set up government structures. They came to understand astrology, mathematics, different things like this, according to the text. And so these Nachash, as they are the fallen ones, they are the angels, what are called the seraphim angels, which if you look into what a seraph is, it's basically a serpent. But what they don't tell you is it's a feathered serpent, and that the seraphim angels, or those angels that rebelled with Lucifer in his insurrection in the early part of, the first world age, that led to the war in heaven, that the seraphim angels are the ones that joined Lucifer, who was a cherub. He was a cherub, and that when he fell, he took on the appearance of one of these reptilian Draco shape-shifting, because they still have the ability to shape-shift. It says in the Bible that they can even present themselves as an angel of light. But that for those that study about the strange nature of these reptilians, you will see that there is a hierarchy, and that the ones that have the greatest authority are those that have the wings, and they're cited as having horns, and as even having the ability to look at man in such a way that they can exterminate him with fright. I would refer to the previous shows that I've done on the reptilian overlords, where in those programs I read from chapter 11 of the Wisdom of Solomon, where Solomon gives reference to the how it was that some of the people that were with Moses, they worshiped these particular Nachash. They worshiped the feathered serpent, just like the Aztecs and the old Mayans who worshiped the feathered serpent. That some of the people that were with Moses, they also worshiped the serpent. And Solomon, in this particular passage, he speaks about how the Father had sent these particular beings as punishment against those that were worshipers of these particular beings. And so he also speaks about how it was that they were able to breathe forth fire, and that they could belch a pall of smoke, and that they could exterminate men with what was, basically known as the evil eye. Which is interesting, because if you read this particular passage in Wisdom of Solomon, which is an apocryphal book that, was counted as part of the canon for the early days of what was the 80 book of canon, but is now part of the apocrypha that has been stripped out of the canon. In this book, in this text, the Wisdom of Solomon, Solomon references the strange nature of these particular creatures. And if you tie this together with what is spoken about in Joel chapter 2, which gives reference to the locust army that is supposed to come at the end of days, and that the locust army will be part of the judgment that is levied upon those not written into the book of life, it also aligns with Revelation 9, where it speaks about the locust army as having stings in their tails and also having the ability to breathe forth fire. I tie all these things together in my book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, but I've done many shows about this that talks about all this as well, and so you can look into that for yourself. But oh gosh, I'm quickly running out of time. I wanted to touch upon real quick a couple other stories that are strangely connected to Satan as having his own children. One is a reference to Alexander the Great. And for those that know, that have looked into, Alexander the Great was cited as being one of the Antichrists by Nostradamus, and he's also cited in the book of Daniel as being, the one that had unified the world in such a way that when his kingdom broke up, his generals would fight over them, and that, that breakup would be referenced in the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of the statue that was of gold, silver, and brass and iron. It also speaks about in Daniel chapter 2, I believe it's verse 43, where they will try to mingle themselves among the seed of men. They are the Nachash, the children of the serpent, the Canaanite bloodline, the lineage of Cain that we've been speaking about in the entirety of this show. But what is interesting and is little known about Alexander is that his mother was a worshiper of Dionysus, and that she used to practice worshiping with snakes, and that she was, I'm going to just read a real quick passage which will give you clarity to this particular thing, because some of these old cults, these old pagan cults, they gave themselves up to these Nachash, and they slept with these Nachash and brought forth children by them. And supposedly Alexander might have been one of these, which is basically the same thing as what happened in Genesis chapter 6 with the sons of God mating with the daughters of Cain, but that resulted in the race of giants, or the men of renown. Reading just a little bit about Olympias, who was the name of his mother. It says this, and supposedly she was also the daughter of Achilles, who was one of these hybrid beings, the result of the sons of God mating with the daughters of man as well. It says this, she was a Greek princess born around 375 BC in the region of Epirus, Albania. She was the orphan daughter of King Neoptolemus, one of Molossian tribe, and had originally been named Polyxena, but then she had many names. She was also believed to have been a devout member of the sex-obsessed, orgiastic, snake-worshipping secret cult of Dionysus. She was described by Plutarch as being of fair skin with long auburn hair. She was arrogant, aloof, known for being insanely jealous, unforgiving, vindictive, and cruel, and she believed herself to be the direct descendant of the god Achilles. In 357 BC, she was married to the Macedonian king Philip II, and it was not a happy marriage because he was a polygamist and he took on, other wives. But anyways, in the first year of their marriage, Olympias gave birth to a son, Alexander. She later said that on the night of their marriage was consummated, a thunderbolt had fell upon her womb and kindled a great fire, and that her son was to be special. Olympias became pregnant with Alexander soon after she was married, and she had another child, Cleopatra, which we know, Cleopatra, we know that she married Caesar and all of that. But anyways, she was an avid worshiper of the god Dionysus, and ancient writers suggest that she had an interest in using snakes in the worship of her favorite god. The writer Plutarch says that one time Philip saw her asleep with a snake in her bed, and after this time he became distant from his wife. Plutarch says that Philip then took other wives, which incited jealousy in Olympias. She also tells Alexander, not only, also she had a relationship with Alexander, just like Ham sleeping with his mother, and bringing forth Canaan. And it was through the line of Canaan that Nimrod, who was also a Gibberum or a mighty man, that he was a giant. And so that whole line of giants came forth again through the line of Canaan after the flood, which I cover this also in my fourth book. But anyway, so supposedly her sleeping with this particular Nachash is what resulted in the birth of Alexander, whom, those of you that know, he basically conquered all of the known world. One other interesting story, which is connected to some of these ancient traditions and which not a lot of people know about, is about a guy named Cecrops. And if you look up, his name is Cecrops, Cecrops. Cecrops was the founder of Athens. But supposedly what makes him interesting is that he was half snake and half man, much like Medusa and the stories of the Gorgon. It says this about him. The first king of Attica, who was half man and half snake, he had no parents and was believed to have been born out of the earth. He had 3 daughters, the Dew sisters, Aglorius, Padrosus, and Herse. I'm not going to read all about him as far as his daughters, but supposedly he was the one that had built the Acropolis and that had set up also some of the serpent worship that was associated to the oracles of this ancient Athenian culture. And so a lot of what became the Bacchian or Dionysus cult, which Olympia, the mother of Alexander, was part of, they would give themselves up to sleeping with these particular serpent beings. And there's another story that's part of the Apocrypha, which I won't be able to read, but you can read it for yourself. It's called Bel and the Dragon. And basically it's a story about Daniel. He was living in Babylon among all the other pagans, and he was one of very, very few that truly kept up the worship of the Most High. And he was challenged by the Babylonian king that Bel was actually a true god. And so in the story, Daniel accepts the challenge of the king, and he says that he's going to prove that Bel as an idol, which they were worshiping a huge statue at this particular time, a statue of this particular reptilian snake god, which I would associate it with as being the same thing, a feathered serpent, same thing as Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and the other references that of this same supposed god. But Daniel tells them that the statue, this idol, cannot eat food, but they're making all these huge sacrifices to this idol, and the king believes that it's the idols that are eating all these particular all these food and all these sacrifices that they were preparing for him. It's the same thing as the story with Abraham and Nimrod, kind of a repeat of that, where Abraham proves to his father and to Nimrod that the statues, the idols that they worship, that neither can they cannot speak nor hear nor eat. But in the story with Daniel, he goes into the temple complex with the king and has his followers spread out a group of a thing of ashes all over the floor in the temple. and then they seal the door, and then the next day they come back and check the door. The door has been sealed. He goes in with the king, and sure enough, all of the food items, all the things that they had sacrificed to the idol had disappeared. But then Daniel exposes the lies of the priesthood that were worshiping Baal, and he shows them how they had come through a back door and underneath the altar somehow, and had come into the temple, and that they were the ones that were eating all the sacrifices that the king had made unto Baal. And so through the deception, these priests were able to deceive the king, and he was furious, so that he slaughtered and judged all the priests of Baal and condemned them to death. But it also speaks about how there was an actual serpent, a living serpent that the Babylonians worshipped. And the king, told Daniel, will you worship this particular serpent because he was actually alive and could be seen? But Daniel builds cakes, that makes cakes of brimstone, and he feeds it to the serpent, and then afterwards ignites him so that he explodes from within. And this, makes all the priests of Baal furious. But he shows to the king how it is that even this particular this serpent that was alive, this particular feathered serpent, that it was also not a god. And so you can look this up for yourself as well. I apologize that I'm not gonna, be able to get to all of the other questions that you have in the chat room. I will be doing a show again next Saturday. For those that don't know, I'm not going to be doing shows on Wednesdays besides when I'm a guest with the hijacker on freedomslips.com until I'm finished with my book, which I'm making great progress, but I keep finding more stuff that I want to add. And so my deadline is coming up very soon. But I will make it available to you because, again, this particular book elaborates on pre-existence, predestination, and our election as the sons of God in our previous embodiment. And so I look forward to making all that available to you and to getting that to you as soon as I can. I appreciate all of your patience, but know that I am working hard to make that available to you, and I will get it to you as soon as possible. I pray that the Father and the Son bless you and lead you in discernment. Please don't believe anything that I say. Do your own homework and come to confirmation for yourself. In Yahushua Yahweh's name I pray. God bless all.